In my last video, I planted a really cool citrus tree inside of a pot, and I gave you every tip and trick that I know of to successfully grow fruit trees inside of containers long term for really good harvest. But in this video, we're going to focus on setting up some drip irrigation to some smaller containers, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the day just cleaning up the garden and getting it back to looking pristine and organized. I want to set up the drip irrigation, but I just remembered that I don't know if I have any little T connectors. Let me go check. If I do, I'll set that up next. I need to buy another kneeling pad because the old one that I had, the dye on it started coming off and it would get all over my clothes and all over the pavers. So I need to purchase a new one. This is one of the new containers. It already has a lot of kitchen clippings in there, a lot of vegetables and fruits and just kitchen scraps. And I topped it with soil, but it still doesn't have drip on it. I've been hand watering it. But in order to plant seeds, I like to have drip installed just because it makes things a lot easier. I don't have to worry about it anymore, and then it'll just get watered on a regular basis. This is Drip Line from Drip Depot, and it has emitters. So this is where the water comes out of every 6 inches. They sell some that has it every 12 inches, but I think 6 inches works well for my container garden. I think if I had a larger piece of land, I would probably do 12 inches because I could plant things a little bit farther apart. But because I have a smaller growing space, this just works a lot better for me. I have a few options. I have my main line running behind it, so I can just make a new hole in the main line and attach this. But I want to try and avoid making too many holes in my main line. Instead, I'm going to attach it to other drip line that's already set up. And in order to do that, I'm going to use some barbed tees. This is my little irrigation toolbox. And in here I have tools that I can use to punch holes, tools that I can use to cut through things. And I also have different types of connectors. And this one is called a T connector because it looks like a little T. And this one's pretty cool because instead of attaching another new line, I can attach the T like this and then just connect it to an existing line. Hold on, I think I'm missing a different type of line too. This little piece of tubing has the holes in it, so this is where the water is going to come out of. But in order to attach it to this one, I like using a different type of line that doesn't have any holes in it. The water is just going to flow through this one. I'm going to attach it to this one right here. It's not that far away, so I only need a small piece. I always like to cut it a little bit longer than I feel like I need to. Now I can go ahead and cut this guy. This is where all of the water is going to come out of, is this piece of tubing, because this is connected to the main line. And now I can split it up and have it water this container and this container. Just like that. So now that I have the water running to this container, I have two options. I have a barbed tee and I have a regular barbed connector. So if I were to use this one, I could close off the circle to my container like this and then just attach it right here. And that would work. Or I can just attach it right here using one barbed connector. I can use a goof plug at the end and I can just wrap it around. And honestly, I think I prefer that a little bit more, because if I use just the barbed tee like this, I feel like I would want to cut this down just a little bit so that it's not too close to the edge and it's not too far away from the center. But if I do it the other way, I can always coil it around however I feel will work best. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a barbed connector right here. I'm going to attach it. I'm going to attach it right here. And then this also makes it easier for me whenever I need to lift up the drip irrigation, maybe to patch something up or to add a little bit more if I feel like I need more water, or if I need to add mulch or any other soil amendments. Now I just need a landscape staple to pin this in place, and then this container is done. And I'm just going to repeat the same thing for all of the new containers. Does that make sense? I feel like I don't know if I'm talking gibberish. So I'm going to attach it right here. And then one right there. And one right here. So you see how it coils around? It's not a whole lot of drip irrigation in this small container, but this is enough to water whatever I plant in here. And I might just go ahead and plant some squash or something. Should I do that before I move on? I could even plant okra in this container and I guarantee you it will grow. I've had sunflowers grow in planters that were 12 inches deep. But this container is done, so I'm going to repeat the same process for every other container. I have 12 of them, but I'm only going to get to a few because I'm running out of landscape staples and I don't have enough barbed tees. And so I'm just going to do as much as I can with the time I have left. So let's move on to the next one. And then sometimes to keep things a little bit more uniform, I like to count how many emitters are in each piece of drip line. That way I can do the same for each container. So in this case, I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 drip emitters for this small container. And to get ahead, I might just trim up the rest of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now I have enough for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 more containers. Honestly, I think after talking you through what exactly I'm doing right now in terms of setting up the drip irrigation, it may be difficult to understand unless you've already set up drip irrigation yourself. Otherwise, saying the names of the parts and what they're called and all of that might make it feel a little bit confusing, or at least that's how I felt whenever I first started setting up drip irrigation in my garden, because I would hear people using the terms of what the items are called and what they do, but I didn't understand what any of that meant. And unfortunately, every single time that I get a question about how I set up my drip irrigation system, I can't give a very direct or thorough answer, because when I first set up the garden and we started designing it out and everything, my husband asked me several times if I wanted somebody to come out and set up drip irrigation throughout the garden, or at least set up all of the stuff underground for the irrigation system. And at the time, I always said no, because we were already spending so much money redoing the backyard, and I'm a very frugal person. I like to DIY a lot of the stuff myself, especially when the project is already so expensive. And at the time, I thought that it was going to be doable for me to water every single garden bed by hand, because back then it was only 6 foot long by 4 feet long garden beds, I believe. And that didn't seem too overwhelming. As time went on though, and I started growing in my garden and taking up more and more space in the yard, it was very difficult to continue watering by hand, especially during the summertime, because in the summer it gets so hot here in the low desert. We're not even in the hottest parts of summer yet, and we're already at 107 to 110 degrees, and it's going to climb higher to the point where this is going to feel like cool weather. But I didn't know that back then, so I said no time and time again to having someone come and set it up, which meant that once I changed my mind, it was a little bit too late, because the pavers were already in the ground and the turf was covering the whole other half of the yard. So I had to figure out how to set up drip irrigation and hide it a little bit, or as much as possible, while still being able to water my plants automatically, because it was just far too much for me to do, especially during heat waves like we're experiencing right now. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was so intimidated. I tried different methods of watering. I tried a PVC setup at one point. And over time, I built up the confidence to try and figure out how to set up drip irrigation. And all of the drip irrigation that I have in Serendipity is above the ground. It's completely exposed. I just try and hide it behind all the containers. But I haven't made a video about it because at the time, I had no idea what I was doing, and it was so many trips of going back and forth between the house and Lowe's or Home Depot, trying to figure out what parts I needed exactly, because oftentimes I would pick out the wrong things. I was just so confused and overwhelmed, and it wasn't something that I set up once and it was good to go, or that it took a day for me to complete. It took me weeks, and even months later, I was still adjusting things on my irrigation. I'm telling you this because I'm not going to be here forever. One day I'm going to move to a bigger piece of land. That is my dream someday. And when I do, I will make sure to record the entire process of setting up drip irrigation or figuring out how to do it. But I don't want to give you guys any misinformation, because it was such a headache to get things wrong and to spend money on something when I was already on a really tight budget, and then having to go back and return it and exchange it for other things. It was just a very stressful time. So once I have it figured out fully, I will make sure to make a video about it. But in the meantime, I just don't feel like I know enough. But there are several other videos out there on YouTube. I just watched as many as I could of people showing how they were setting up drip irrigation. And there's people out there who can explain it so well, to the point where even something that is completely foreign can seem doable. And you know what? That's something that I regret so much, because oftentimes as I'm working through things in the garden, even though I messed up so many times, I feel like maybe it would have been helpful for me to record the journey of just learning how to set up drip irrigation. Because oftentimes whenever you see more established gardens and the irrigation is already set up and the little things that they do seem so simple, but sometimes it took quite a bit of trial and error to get there. And I feel like that's an important part to share about gardening, is to show the raw stuff that happens when things don't go as planned, because maybe that'll encourage other gardeners to continue trying even if they don't get it right the first time. The irrigation's coming on and it's working. Usually the water would have only come to this container right here. You can see the water dripping, but because we use that tea, now it's coming to this container too, without me having to make any more holes into the main line. You see? It's gonna get watered for maybe like 3 to 5 minutes, and this will be happening every single day, a few times a day, to keep the soil from drying out, especially in these smaller containers. And then in this one, look, I planted a Cocozelle squash. Since I can't work on that anymore, I have to do something else on my to-do list. And I think I want to direct sow seeds, but I might just leave that until the very end, right before the sun goes down. And instead, I'll just focus on either cleaning up Fig Alley, which would probably help a lot, because the poor thing's a mess right now. But where's my list? I really don't know. Okay. Anyways, moving on to the next thing. Even in smaller trellises, because the melons are like mini melons. It's going to guarantee that my seeds are able to germinate. I found a few other red regular worms. They've been living inside of the compost, so that's pretty cool.